Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chancellor, for those generous remarks. The Chairperson of the Council, Owekitibwa Makerere, Owekitibwa Robert Nsibirwa, and members of the Nsibirwa family, headed by none other than the Honorable Rhoda Nsibirwa Kalema, my colleagues from the Kabaka's government, Omutaka Namwama. He is the chairperson of the Clan Heads Council, Omukubiriza Olukiiko lw'Abataka, not traditional leaders. And other members, the other leaders who are introduced, the Deputy Kago, we are in Kago, we are in Chadondo County. Senate members, organizers of the event, the teaching and non-teaching staff of Makerere, students, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be invited to deliver the inaugural Annual Nsibirwa Public Lecture in celebration of Makerere University's centenary. It is befitting that in celebrating 100 years of its existence, the university should choose to remember and honor the life of the late Katikkiro Luther Nsibirwa, a man who served his nation with distinction and who laid down his life in the pursuit of public service and the advancement of the people of Buganda, the people of Uganda, and of East Africa at large. Let me start by acknowledging the remarks of Mama Rhoda Nsibirwa, which she's just made a few minutes back. We thank God that He has given her life to witness this historic moment. I also want to acknowledge the remarks of the chairperson and of course of the Vice Chancellor, who has generously introduced me. When I received the invitation, I did not hesitate to reschedule all my other commitments to make time and be here today. Madam Chairperson, as many people know, Makerere University is my alma mater, and my studies and experiences on this hallowed campus contributed greatly to making me who and what I am today. I was therefore pleased to be given the opportunity to give back by contributing to the pursuit of knowledge, as well as to connect with the young people who are studying here today. And I thank them for coming in such large numbers. As I will elaborate later, there are a few points that I would like to invite scholars with greater qualification than myself to ponder, research into, and act upon. However, I would also like to start by stating that I stand before you as a graduate of this great establishment, and I think I'm a living proof of what Makerere University can produce. So if there is a young man or woman in the audience today who has come to listen to this lecture with some uncertainty or self-doubt, I hope seeing me standing here will inspire them to set ambitious goals, as well as to have the dedication and tenacity to see them through. It's important in life to start things, but it's more important to be tenacious, to be resilient, to walk the entire journey. So, probably this will inspire you to do that. As the Oscar-winning actress Lupita Nyong'o once said, you know her, she's from Kenya. No matter where you are from, your dreams are valid. I hasten to add that her father, Professor Peter Anyang Nyongo, who is the incumbent governor of Kisumu County in Kenya, is also a graduate of this great university. And of course, as is President Mwai Kibaki, who's just been interred, and President Julius Nyerere, and many others. Madam Chairperson and Mr. Vice Chancellor, it would be very discourteous of me if I didn't start by thanking the organizers of this lecture for living up to their name, organizers, and preparing what is very obviously a well-organized event. You just heard Mama Rhoda. Thank you. It's quite obvious that plenty of thought and work have gone on in the background to enable us to have this platform, and I thank you so very much. I also wish to recognize in a special way the presence of members of the Nsibirwa family, led by Mrs. Rhoda Kalema, and the second deputy Katikkiro and Minister for Finance and Planning in the Kingdom, Owekitibwa Robert Nsibirwa. Of course, Owekitibwa Nsibirwa and Professor Barnabas Nawangwe are all busy with Milton Obote. None of them had the chance to go to St. Mary's College, Kisubi. But I thank members of the Nsibirwa family for keeping the legacy of Owekitibwa Martin Luther Nsibirwa alive. We don't talk about him, alone. When you talk about the Nsibirwa family, we've got many people to look up to. So it's an honor that you live, that you've kept the legacy of Martin Luther Nsibirwa alive. I was asked to speak under the theme of revisiting the life of the late Katikkiro Nsibirwa in the lenses of Makerere at 100 years in general, but with particular focus on the contribution of cultural institutions in engendering public goods. I do not propose to narrate the detailed story of Martin Luther Nsibirwa's life. There is insufficient time for that. And nor is this the ideal place for a detailed study of what was definitely a very rich and very well-lived life. However, I think it would be useful to outline some key dates in this great man's life, taken from a biographical essay penned by his daughter, the late Janet Nsibirwa Mudowe, as a backdrop to the points that I wish to make today. As you heard from his daughter, Martin Luther Nsibirwa was born in Kirindi Bugerere in 1883. This was during the reign of Ssekabaka Mutesa I, and I'm told that Nsibirwa's father, Chiwana, was in service of Kabaka Mutesa I, making canoes for Buganda's naval fleet. Buganda had a navy on Lake Victoria. Actually, the Kingdom of Buganda was in charge of the entire Lake Victoria, stretching to Tanzania today and Kenya. For those who are students of history, these were rapidly changing times in this part of the world. Buganda was a native kingdom in expansion mode at this time. Buganda had acquired guns from the Zanzibari Arabs who had come to the court of Mutesa's father, Ssekabaka Suna II, who is lying in Wamala, not far from here, in the 1940s and in the 1840s and 1850s. Expansion was occurring at the expense of native neighbors, most especially the Kingdom of Bunyoro. But even as Buganda was expanding, it was also at the center of competing Western European imperialist interests. John Hannington Speke, I think you know him. We've had places named after him. We may have to ask ourselves the particular reason why, but you know many of them. John Hannington Speke had opined that Narubari, Lake Narubari, which he named Lake Victoria, for reasons I'm not very clear about, was the source of the Nile in 1858. This aroused British interest in controlling Buganda so as to secure its imperial interests in Egypt. It's also worth noting that the Berlin Conference, in which the great European powers, as they called themselves, agreed to carve up Africa into different spheres of influence. That took place in 1884, just 1 year after Nsibirwa was born. Nsibirwa's life spanned the reign of 4 Kabakas of Buganda: Mutesa I, Mwanga II, Chwa II, and Mutesa II. If you look at the situation in Buganda and Africa as a whole at the time Nsibirwa was born, and compare it to the situation that pertained at the time of his death in 1945, you can appreciate that he lived in times of drastic and very dramatic change. The kind of change that some of us born after the middle of the 20th century can only imagine if we watch science fiction movies about Earth invasions by extraterrestrial beings. I know students love to watch science fiction movies a lot. Be careful, it's not reality. Yet, as I'll discuss later, the leaders of Buganda at that time, including Nsibirwa, used native African knowledge as a compass to navigate the strange and often unsettled waters of this rapidly changing world with an amazing degree of success and some understandable failures. Nsibirwa was baptized in 1895. You heard that from his daughter. And although he learned to read and write, he taught himself. He did not obtain formal missionary education. Rather, as was the tradition in those days, when he came of age, he was sent to the household called a Chisakate of Katikkiro of to serve as a page. The chiefs used to have a Bisakate. The word Chisakate, which is very common these days because of Nabagereka's endeavors to mentor children, comes from that. Every chief had a Chisakate. You ministers of the Kabaka should have a Bisakate today. If you don't have them, stop living in apartments. Pages were like young apprentices in leadership. They were mentored by their master, and they learned by seeing and doing. It was practical, hands and eyes-on kind of education, which the Chinese, you know Confucius, you must know Confucius, here in this great university. You know, Confucius had these words: I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. It must not be forgotten that native administration fused the executive and judicial functions. So young men would watch their seniors dispense justice, as well as execute and enforce the various programs of the state. The young men emerged from this Bisakate, plural for Chisakate, ready for deployment as administrators and military leaders. Nsibirwa was no exception to this general trend. And after being mentored in Kagwa's Chisakate and distinguishing himself by diligent learning and service, he was deployed formally as a Gombola chief in Ichagwe in 1920. You know, he was born in 1883. At the age of 37, he was a Gombola chief. He must have done well because 2 years later, that is 1922, when Makerere was starting, he was promoted to the office of Makerere, Saza Chief of Bugerere County. You know, for the young people here, that is Kayunga district today, I think. When Makerere was starting, Martin Luther Nsibirwa was a county chief. And county chiefs at that time were no joking subject. Again, he made a good account of himself. And between 1924 and 1925, he was acting in Mukwenda, the Saza chief of Singo, which was a much larger and more politically as well as economically important county. He was to return to Bugere in 1925, only to be appointed the substantive Mukwenda, that is the county chief of Singo in 1927. Honorable Bagala comes from Mitiana, which is within Singo County. When I said Mukwenda, she added of Singo. She's waiting for the verdict of the Court of Appeal. I don't know why she didn't hire me as her lawyer. 1 year later, in 1928, he was appointed Omwanika, the very position being held by his grandson, Owekitibwa Robert Nsibirwa. And don't you think he resembles him? Look at that picture here and look at him. And you know, under the 1900 agreement, Buganda had 3 ministers. The Buganda government had 3 ministers. The Katikkiro is a ministerial post. You're just prime, but you're a minister. The Katikkiro, the Mwanika, and the Mulamuzi. And he was occupying one of those 3 coveted offices. And he held that office for only 1 year before becoming Katikkiro in 1929. Incidentally, he's the first Katikkiro to reside in the Butikkiro. Butikkiro is the official residence of the Katikkiro, where I reside. In 1929. Its construction started in 1926. Completed when he was Katikkiro, and he was the first Katikkiro to reside and work within it. Iconic building. Professor Nawango is an architect. He appreciates these things. He was to serve as Katikkiro until 1941, when he was forced to resign because of his perceived less than enthusiastic handling of the Namasole affair. You know, in Buganda, in Namasole, the mother of the Kabaka does not remarry. Now, upon the demise of Kabaka Daudi Chwa, 1939, his wife became the Namasole because she was the mother of Kabaka Edward Mutesa. But then she remarried to a gentleman called Peter Chigozi. Taboo. And the Katikkiro was forced to resign. Nsibirwa was replaced as Katikkiro by Owekitibwa Samuel Wamala, a member of the Buganda Lukiiko, who was well known for his radical anti-colonial sentiments. Wamala's tenure was short and somewhat restless, owing largely to his difficult relationship with the British colonial government. Wamala was forced to resign in 1945 and was actually exiled by the British, I think in Karamoja. You know, you've witnessed people being driven from Kampala to Nakasongola, from Kampala, I think even to Karamoja, recently, in recent times, contemporary history. It started way back with the British. And this was not an ordinary political actor. This was the Katikkiro of Buganda. Wasn't that, you know, impetuous? But they did it. In July 1945, Nsibirwa was reappointed Katikkiro of Buganda. He was considered a safe pair of hands both by the British and the young Ssekabaka Mutesa II, who ascended the throne in 1939. When it was clear in the mind of Kabaka Daudi Chwa that he might die. He called the Katikkiro, Martin Luther Nsibirwa, and told him, should I die, please help my son. And those who witnessed that moment recounted it to Ssekabaka Edward Mutesa. So when they went to Chagwe in Namakomo to bring back Nsibirwa as Katikkiro, he declined. He was, I think, even angry because he was forced to resign. You remember the Namasola affair? His colleagues in cabinet, members of the Luchiko, the Bataka, were very unkind to him. You know, Professor and Madam Chairperson, you see these Batakas here? When they think I've erred, they can be very unkind to me. You see them seated here nicely listening. And these colleagues of mine, they can be very unkind to the Katikkiro. You know, the Katikkiro is like in a position of a football team manager. When the players perform poorly, it's all abuses for the manager. When the team wins, it's all praises for the players. Now you ask yourself, when is the manager going to be thanked? So he refused to come back to be Katikkiro again. Then Kabaka Mutesa II told him, you promised my father to help me. You promised my father to help me. And upon hearing that, he came back and retook the Damula. If he hadn't retaken the Damula, Makerere wouldn't be here, maybe. So you should. But he was only to execute his duties for only a few months before being felled by an assassin's bullet at Namirem Cathedral in the morning of the 5th of September, 1945. Now let's look at Nsibirwa and Makerere. But for starters, Nsibirwa's assassination was shocking to the nation, as you can imagine. There was a lot of speculation then about the identity of the assassin or assassins. There was also plenty of speculation about the likely motive. Some thought it might have been something to do with the Namasole affair. Others speculated that it might be something to do with Nsibirwa's retrenchment of many officials upon his reappointment as Katikkiro in 1945. This is what he did when he regained the Damula, when he became Katikkiro again. All those people who were unkind to him, he kicked them where it hurts. He kicked them. He was also very uncharitable to them. So some people feared that perhaps these were the conspirators. But the predominant narrative was that Nsibirwa was killed for his role in acquiring land for the expansion of Makarere College. It has been ably explained by his daughter. Indeed, one George William Senka Atuka, an ex-King's African Rifles serviceman, was arrested in Bakuri, tried in the High Court and convicted for Nsibirwa's murder on that basis. But certainly, giving land to the government, the colonial government, to expand Makerere was not well received nearly at every level within the kingdom. People didn't have the kind of foresight that Nsibirwa had. They said, the college already has land. What's the problem with this Katikkiro? You start by allowing the Namaso to remarry. You come back from your village and now you're giving our kingdom property, Baganda land. Probably that was the reason he was killed. And as you heard from Honorable Luther Nsibirwa, the land was in private hands. And when the government failed to acquire more on a willing buyer, willing seller basis, the colonial government requested the Buganda government to exercise compulsory acquisition under the 1900 agreement. Nsibirwa, an accomplished and foresighted administrator who, as you shall recall, had no formal missionary education himself, saw it fit to compulsorily acquire the land. He did this because it was the right and wise thing to do. He did it even though it was unpopular at the time. And I think that was the result of his training and his vast experience as an administrator. And of course, he paid for it with his life. But I think it's a big lesson for leaders everywhere. You have to do what you have to do at times. You have to do what you have to do, many times actually. These are the good lessons that encourage us to do that. The Vice Chancellor has to take decisions at times which he has to take. Nsibirwa's name has therefore always been closely associated with the history of the establishment of the modern Makerere University. And like we all know now, I think in 1996, 97, a hall of residence was renamed after him, an action which resonates with the decolonization movement of the 21st century. Yeah. I was in the university hall, the only university in this university. The only hall in this university. We used to call it Hey Baby. I don't know whether the anthem still sang. Hey baby, one for Katanga, one for Soweto, Beya, Beya, Heb, Heb, Heb. That's the anthem of UH, at least in my time. I don't know who has changed it. You are not singing along with me. I think you all come from Nsibirwa here. We are here in large part because of the wisdom, determination, and foresightedness of great men and women such as Martin Luther Nsibirwa, and it is fitting that we should celebrate them. Now, there are lessons we learn from Nsibirwa's life, especially with regard to the role of native institutions in engendering public goods. But before I set about extracting some lessons from Nsibirwa's life, which I believe are relevant today, I would like to define a couple of terms. I'm a lawyer. You already know that. And we lawyers love defining terms to make sure that everyone is on the same page. When you go to an act, I think section 2 usually the definition section, they define every term used in the law to make it clear to the one who reads that law. I prefer use of the terms native institutions or traditional institutions over the term cultural institutions. And the organizers chose cultural institutions. The latter is in popular use today, but the word culture has come to have a very restrictive meaning, usually associated with language, the arts, music, dance, and drama. The institution that Nsibirwa served in and eventually presided over was a functional native government with administrative, executive, and judicial powers. Although Buganda was under the imperial watch of Great Britain and therefore had her native sovereignty curbed, it wasn't the largely emasculated institution that exists in the 1995 Constitution. It was and remains a native or traditional institution with roots going back to the 11th or 12th century BCE. Secondly, the economists amongst you might already know that public goods are a basic service or commodity made available to all members of society on what economists call non-excludable and non-rivalrous basis. Economists like Professor Gobi, I think. A good is non-excludable if it is free. That is available to everyone without a charge being made for it. A good is said to be non-rivalrous if it can be enjoyed by many consumers at once without anyone's consumer's enjoyment of it affecting the enjoyment of another. Roads are a good example of public goods. Once constructed, everyone and anyone can use it, the road, free of charge. I know there are tolls around Busega there. And my proper use of that road should not derogate from the enjoyment of the same road by another person. National defense or law enforcement are also frequently given as examples of public goods. So it is highly debatable whether higher education, such as is offered here at Makerere, is a public good. It's highly debatable. It is largely no longer free of charge. It is also not non-rivalrous in the sense that even though the university has been expanding, there is a limit to the number of students that can be admitted before standards begin to drop perilously. There is a limit. So if we are going to talk about education, then perhaps we should focus on what the economists call the positive externalities of the consumption of education by a few. A positive externality is said to exist if the consumption of a good or service by one person benefits a third party who has not consumed the good or service himself or herself. Education of a few individuals can have an incalculably beneficial effect on society as a whole and can even come to be appreciated as a public good. I mean, a doctor is going to treat the public. One doctor who qualifies, like the late Rose Nsibirwa was a doctor. She handled medical issues of so many people. And I think the impact of that one person is incalculable. The leaders of our native institutions, of whom Nsibirwa was an outstanding example, implicitly understood the value and positive externality of education. This trend started right from Ssekabaka Ssuuna II, who was the first Kabaka of Buganda to come into contact with distant and more technological advanced foreigners. But I think that was perhaps best personified by Ssekabaka Mutesa I. In his famed letter to Queen Victoria, Mutesa I, written in 1875, about a decade before Nsibirwa was born, Mutesa's primary request was for Queen Victoria to send experts, abakugu mu byamagezi, that's how he coined it, who could teach him and the people of Buganda so that Buganda could achieve the same level of technological advancement as Britain. The primary thing that Mutesa wanted to obtain was education, which could enable the people of Buganda to savor in the amenities of technological advancement. Christian missionaries took advantage of Mutesa's letter and came to Buganda. History, my dear friends, they took advantage. And I think you are happy for it. You're always in churches, aren't you? And relying on miracles to survive. Read your books. There are no miracles in any church or any mosque. God helps only those who help themselves. If you're smart enough to go to the library and read, and you pray, God will reward you with wisdom. But if you do it the other way around, and you spend in the evening in church every day, you're going to be in trouble, my friend. Don't forget I told you that. But it's important to note that Mutesa I was able to distinguish between knowledge, enlightenment, and technological advancement on the one hand, and Christianity on the other. It's also important to note that he appreciated the risk of loss of sovereignty that these foreign instructors could pose to his kingdom. Hence his express request to Queen Victoria that whoever she sends should be honest and not inclined to treason. Don't know whether they heeded that. When the Christians came, they started fighting over things that they didn't own. True. The battle of Mengo between Catholics and Protestants. And we were in the process losing our sovereignty. Hey, by the way, he also wanted to marry Queen Victoria. Oh, yes. He said that after you send me the teachers, you can come over. I will make you my chief wife, Kadurubari. And I'm sure the Britons must have said the guy has the nerve. But he said it. He wanted to do it. The Buganda Kingdom maintained the open attitude to education from that moment on. And several of the historical schools in Buganda, such as those that Honorable Rhoda Kalema attended, King's College Buddo, which they have refused to write with a double D for some reason. Buddo, where she went, or Mengo Senior Secondary School here, or St. Mary's College, Kisubi, where I went, or Namiryango College, just here, and many others. Gaya's High School, where she went. All these schools and more were built on land donated by the Kingdom of Buganda. Muiri, unfortunately, is not within Buganda. The understanding of the positive externalities that come from education run deep, and we can see this clearly in the life of Nsibirwa. Nsibirwa, himself without formal education, championed the education of all his, I thought there were 25. I've just learned there were 26. Looks like I'd left out one. He championed the education of all his 26 children, both girls and boys. Hear that, girls. In the 30s, in the 20s, girls. Just think about it. Today, as the Katikkiro, I don't know how many years since Nsibirwa died, I still go all over Buganda urging parents to think about taking girls to school. Nsibirwa knew it in the 1930s. What do you want us to do for you? Nsibirwa knew this in the 1930s. But we are still struggling with some parents who think that the boys should have an edge over the girls. It was therefore quite natural and understandable for a man who was steeped in native education and in the understanding that came with serving in the native institution of the Kingdom of Buganda to advocate the use of eminent domain, that is compulsory acquisition of land, to expand Makerere College, enabling it to become a university. Nsibirwa's achievements as a chief and later as Katikkiro in a rapidly changing world also speak the value of the native education that would-be leaders had to undergo. As I said earlier, it was a hands and eyes on kind of training. It was immersive and practical. No one could ascend the ladder of the kingdom's administration without it, and it produced many great leaders. This training produced leaders who were steeped in what the Germans call realpolitik. That is realistic, practical politics. They were driven not by ideology. They were driven not by ideology, Honorable Bagala, or theology, Canon Serubide. They simply assessed the common good and found ways that worked using what they had at their disposal. This is how a man like Nsibirwa could remain relevant and able to lead Buganda in 1945. Some scholars stepped in foreign ideologies that they've learned even here in Makerere and elsewhere. misunderstood the way they related, the way they worked, the Nsibirwas, the way they appreciated the realpolitik, and they contemptuously labeled it collaboration. I think it's contemptuous. The native institution of the Kingdom of Buganda worked with the British during the times of the British Protectorate. We know that. But this was not out of a desire to expand or serve the interests of the British Empire as such, but they hardly had a way out when everything is considered. Where didn't the British colonize where they wanted to colonize? Because of the non-cooperation of the native leaders. Where did it happen? Where? Nsibirwa and others like him were primarily interested in preserving and protecting the native interests of the people of Buganda in a rapidly changing world. They understood the fact that the technological advantage the British had over us at that time was such that physical and confrontational resistance was futile and could lead to negative intergenerational effects. Do you read me? Because you see, the British destroyed everything in Zimbabwe. The man stood the other side and said, if Lobengula looks on and does nothing, we shall crush him. But if he fights us, we shall fight back and no mercy shall be shown unto him. Any historians here? Whether Lobengula looked on or he fought, he was to be crushed. Now the wise man was to try to marry Queen Victoria. Do you read me? Because the man had superior technology. It's that simple. It has nothing to do with nothing other than superior technology. So we don't want these contemptuous people trying to distort history. They even went to Mbari because there was no choice for them. Professor Nawangwe. So, I think it was better to preserve the little that we had and to skill up the population to be able to march and eventually free ourselves from British colonial rule. I strongly disagree with those who harshly judge the very brave, wise, and industrious men of this age, such as Martin Luther Nsibirwa. They did what they could using what little they had and achieved far more in real terms than many of the people who dare to judge and criticize them today. Statistics don't lie. Here we are in Makerere. They don't lie. I believe it was a mistake for us to jettison all of this in favor of only requiring leaders to show academic certificates, which are the equivalent of A-level, and to engage in populist campaigns. Today, all that is required is to show an A-level certificate. And you go in the campaign, depending on which area you are donned the color, red or yellow or blue, and you get votes. I always say that leadership or politics is not a game. Leadership or politics is not a game. Politics is about the lives, livelihoods, and well-being of the people. It is a mistake to think that people who have done nothing other than theoretical studies in schools and who have good rhetorical or debating skills make good administrators. I think it's a big mistake. The system that we have adopted today poses the danger of producing ideologues who try to bend situations to meet their ideological beliefs, or populists who view political contests simply as a measure of their popularity. They get into power easily. Donald Trump is a good example. Boris Johnson is another. Even this man under siege in Ukraine is another example. rhetoric. It can cause problems. I think if he was more experienced and more educated the way the Nsibirwas were educated, his country wouldn't be under attack today. Think about it deeply. You came to Makerere to exercise your brains. From what we know about the life and work of Nsibirwa, he was neither an ideologue nor a populist. If he had been a populist, Makerere University would not exist. Or maybe it would exist, but not as we know it today. Because it was popular to say, we are not going to acquire land compulsorily for the university. We can't give away kingdom land. And then the gallery would applaud him, and the chiefs and everybody. But he said, no, I am a leader, and I've got to do what I've got to do. From the life history of Nsibirwa, we learn that native institutions were results-oriented. Nsibirwa was never promoted from one station to another purely on the basis of what he promised to do. Isn't that the fashion today? He was not promoted because of his potential. He was assessed and promoted based on actual results that he delivered. In his day, the key performance indicators were effective delivery of key public goods. As a Gombola chief in Kasau, Nsibirwa was tasked with increasing food security and household income by encouraging the growing of coffee and cotton. As a Saza chief, both in Bugerere and Singo, Nsibirwa had to drive food security and stable household incomes, as well as drive the smallpox vaccination effort. He was also in charge of tax collection. Nsibirwa and his colleagues administered vast territories, mostly on foot and bicycle. Mostly on foot and bicycle. Today, I don't know how we go about our work. Nsibirwa delivered the results. He delivered the results and he was promoted. Not because of populism or ideologue. It was out of the proven efforts of Nsibirwa and others like him that Buganda achieved rapid and massively transformative social and economic growth in the early to mid-20th century. So, ladies and gentlemen, leadership in its proper form should concentrate on delivering results. Leaders who are properly oriented should seek to be judged on the things that they have done for the people and not simply on how many promises they can make. I believe that it will be a timely contribution for the academics at Makerere. There are very many here. Professor Masagazi is here. Professor Umar Kwakumba is here. Professor Sauda Namialo is here. And many others I haven't noticed. There are very many academics. I think the academics here, they should engage in extensive research about the practical aspects of the various native institutions of Uganda. By studying the lives, work, and times of people like Martin Luther Nsibirwa, we may understand how to rectify the shortcomings of the leadership of today. Emphasis should be placed on the key selection criteria and training methods for leaders. Perhaps we can identify key components. Perhaps we can identify key components of the native methods and incorporate them into a practical course that can be rolled out for all the leaders and would-be leaders in the public and corporate sphere. The Kingdom of Buganda would be very pleased to work with you in whatever way that we can to realize this. As the serving Katikkiro of the Kingdom of Buganda, I am proud to say that we are trying to emulate Nsibirwa and the others who came before us in a number of ways. I'm glad that Owekitibwa Mulwanyamuli is here. He had a daunting task of reconstructing the Kabaka's government after, of course, what we experienced in 1966-67. Daunting task it was. So I'm trying to emulate him, as I try to emulate Martin Luther Nsibirwa. I strongly believe that actions speak louder than words, and that our people will not be advanced by empty sloganeering, but by the execution of tangible programs to improve their basic standards of living. We have concentrated on mobilizing people to work hard, to deliver themselves from biting jaws of poverty. With programs such as Martyrdom, I'm sure you've heard about that program. We have mobilized people to grow more coffee with tangible results. Just a few examples. Coffee production, for example, has gone up by more than 35% in Buganda. 35%. And hear this. And hear this. And Uganda's coffee exports have gone up by more than 30%, bringing in more than $700 million last year. We have also engaged in driving vaccination programs for infectious diseases such as COVID-19, polio, and many others. On the education front, more than 25,000 students have benefited from the Kabaka Education Fund in the past 20 years or so. In all, the Kingdom of Buganda remains focused on improving the lives of the people of Buganda and engendering public goods for the people of Buganda, for all Ugandans, and for people of East Africa. Next Thursday on the 12th of May, it will be 9 years since I was announced Katikkiro of Buganda. And if anyone thinks that I've contributed anything to the public good in Buganda and in Uganda during my tenure as Katikkiro, in those 9 years, it's because I am privileged to stand on the shoulders of heroes like Martin Luther Nsibirwa, who clearly understood the meaning of serving the community. Before I wind up, I would like to commend the university administration headed by the Vice Chancellor for turning Kabaka Mutesa's residence into the Mutesa the Second Museum. Any community that is going to make advancement or progress must have a sense of history. We are not products of industrial lines, of factories. Kabaka Mutesa studied here before he went to Cambridge. He's an alumnus of this university, therefore. And the house where he slept has been restored and turned into a museum in commemoration of his own contribution to education in Uganda. That is commendable, Professor. And it is gratifying to hear that the Ivory Tower is being restored. It's gratifying to hear that the Ivory Tower is being restored. I told Professor Nawang, fortunately he's an architect, we want to see it as it was. You know? Yes, as it was. Well, I don't think we should have these modern twists and designs and strange things that people are interested in these days. Actually, originally, it didn't even have that blue color on the windowsill. Originally, it didn't even have the blue color on the windowsill. It was white and off-white and gray. Because restoration is about recreating what existed for posterity. I'm sure you all know as scholars that been different universities. They could have built iconic towers, but when you visit all of them, they maintain especially the symbols of those institutions as they were. That's why I was very pleased when they restored the house of Kabaka Mutesa as it was when he slept in it. When we regained Katikkiro, we restored it as it was by the time Katikkiro Mayanja and Kanji left on the 24th of May, 1966. And we're now restoring Kasubi tombs. We're about to end the restoration. And you know, with the tombs, we've gone back to the original structures it was by Kabaka Mutesa the first, because Kabaka Daudicho had made a few changes. We've gone back. We went to the Royal Geographical Society in London, and we got the actual photographs of Mutesa's house, Muziba Zala Mpanga. So, the Ivory Tower, we look forward to enjoying Makerere with the Ivory Tower back in place, and we thank you so very much. I would like to appreciate the Department of Performing Arts for singing the anthem so well, although I'm not an expert in music, but I know something. Kabaka tumwesiga. Zena yimbantia nesitenda sawa sajja Kabaka asanira fugo Buganda buna nafenga tumwesiga. So singa tumwesiga ngebizigo bya Samona. That one, you've got to look into it. I think it's called a dead beat in music. But it is wonderful the way you sing. And I think at the next opening of the Buganda Luchiko, the Minister for Luchiko Affairs is here, we should invite this choir to sing the national anthem and the Buganda anthem in Bulangi. Don't they sing beautifully? And the dances. Wonderful, wonderful, I thank you. So once again, I thank the organizers for inviting me here today, and I hope that this is a sign of Makerere's continuing commitment to a strong, proactive, and mutually beneficial relationship with the Kingdom of Buganda. We congratulate you, Mr. Vice Chancellor, Madam Chairperson, and everyone associated with this university upon achieving 100 years. And in keeping with the motto, we build for the future. The Kingdom looks forward to building the next 100 years with this great institution. Awangale nnyo Ssaabasajja Kabaka wa Buganda.